Hey guys, Bartel's Bookshelf here with my latest recent reads video just before Christmas, or I'm probably going to be posting this on Christmas, Christmas Eve. So if you're watching this, hello, happy Christmas Eve, New Year's, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, all that stuff, whatever you celebrate. Happy holidays. Hope you're having a good one. Hope things aren't too stressful. I know they often can be. I've been there. But yeah, so unfortunately, my reading sort of habits have declined a little bit over the last couple months. Whenever I made my last video, I've completed 3 books, which is pretty pathetic for me. Depending on how quickly I get through some of my other reads over here, I will probably be closing out this year only finishing 38 books, which for me is I think that's the lowest I've had since I got back into reading in 2014, so it's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, I know it sounds stupid to complain about that, considering that the average American reads, 10 to 12 books a year, if that. So, I'll take my victories where I can get them, but still, in 2015 alone, I read over 100 books, so, it's been kind of a steady decline over the last few years, unfortunately. But, point is, I'm reading. That's good, right? So, yeah, let's get into this. First book I finished was the 7th book in the Legend of Drizzt series. This is The Legacy by R.A. Salvatore, if it focuses. I started this series a couple years ago, and I've been really enjoying it, just kind of slowly working my way through them. I tend to pick them up whenever I want something that's sort of, low-key, sort of like popcorn fantasy stuff, because they're very good for that. And this is also the start of a new quadrilogy, which I have the other books over here. Don't know when I'll get to them, but I did enjoy this. It's hard to kind of summarize if you don't really know anything going into the series, but Dark Elf Drizzt, this is after the first, technically the chronology's weird. So the original trilogy was Crystal Shard, Streams of Silver, and Halfling's Gem. And then the character of Drizzt became so popular that Salvatore wrote a prequel trilogy that went into Drizzt's backstory, so that became the first trilogy, and then the original trilogy became the second trilogy. It's a little confusing, but this is following on from that, when Drizzt and his friends are kind of firmly settled at Mithril Hall, but one of his estranged sisters comes back to get revenge on him, and it's kind of just the beginning of that, and also the evil assassin Artemis Entreri gets involved too, as well as Jarlaxle, who's a lot of fun. I enjoyed this. As I say, a lot of these Drizzt books tend to be very kind of light, fun, sort of entertaining, like popcorn fantasy. Like, they're not really doing anything super unique or special or anything, but they're just really solid, well put together, just entertaining, kind of almost cozy in a way. Like, it's very, it's Dungeons and Dragons, so if you kind of picture that typical sort of Dungeons and Dragons vibe or style, it's very much in line with that, and Salvatore's fight scenes are always really well written, very clear and concise and easy to follow, which is saying something, because I've read quite a few books where just the action scenes were just incomprehensible or boring, but never boring when Salvatore's writing them, which is very nice. The main thing I love about these books is just the sense of camaraderie between the characters. You've got, Drizzt, who's, sort of the one good dark elf, pretty much, You've got Bruenor Battlehammer, who's the, that stereotypical angry dwarf. You've got his adopted human daughter, Caddy Bree, who's great with a bow. And you've got Wolfgar, who's your stereotypical, long-haired, blonde barbarian, and it's just a lot of fun. There's a lot of sort of I guess you'd say sort of Marvel-esque sort of banter between them, which is entertaining. That's when it's very sort of crowd-pleasing, sort of entertaining, heroic fantasy type stuff. If you like Robert E. Howard and that, sword and sorcery, that kind of thing, this is very much up your alley if you've never read this series. There's some pretty cool stuff in this book specifically. I really liked the big Drider that Drizzt fights at one point, which is depicted on the cover there, which is really awesome. That's a really fun scene. One of the new characters that's introduced in this book is what is his name? Thibbledorf Puent, and he's this basically a berserker dwarf who's just all about just fighting and killing and violence, and he's got this suit of armor that's got spikes all over it, and and when he goes in berserker rage, he just kills everything no matter what, and he's a lot of fun, with his just very one track mind, and everyone else is kind of leery of him, which is kind of funny. He has a way of sort of going into a room and just sort of taking everything over, and everyone's kind of just like letting him do his thing, which is funny. There's a bit where he's like going berserk and he's like killing a bunch of drow, and he's like, oh, one of these might be the king, Brunar. One of these might be the king's friend, that we're supposed to be looking for. Oh well, if he dies, then nothing to be done about that, So he's a lot of fun. The relationship between Drizzt and Artemis Entreri, the evil assassin, continues to be incredibly homoerotic, including a big fight on the edge of a cliff where there's all this stuff about like release your anger and fight me and stuff, and Artemis is like obsessed with taking him down, being the only one to take him down, and it's like you must die by my hand, and it's just very very homoerotic, and it's a lot of fun. And as well, as someone who's a big perv, I enjoyed one of the things I enjoy about these books is with Wolfgar, the big buff blonde barbarian. He's very much. It's funny, his physique is like constantly described. They're constantly going on about his big muscles, and he's like flexing, and and just constantly talking about how huge he is and stuff. And he has this big fight with Drizzt at one point, that's again very sort of charged, and it was a lot of fun. This book wasn't amazing, I don't think, in terms of like the rest of the books. I think I would put this on the lower end of the spectrum, just because this being the first book in a quadrilogy, it's setting up a lot of stuff, and a lot of the book is kind of just the characters kind of wandering around in the tunnels below Mithril Hall, trying to find all these drow and trying to fight them off, and just kind of like fight scene after fight scene after fight scene after fight scene. And while there's a few like twists and sort of turns that I wasn't expecting, one that like genuinely shocked me that I was sincerely like freaking out about, it's just not that there's not a lot of movement in terms of like plot stuff. And there's something else that happens in this book that I was just kind of rolling my eyes at, but maybe that's because I kind of know where the series is going, so it was kind of like, all right, yeah, sure, But again, it was just a very breezy, entertaining time, as a lot of these books are, and at some point I'm going to get to the rest of the books in this quadrilogy. I don't know when, because my moods change like the tides, so, one day I'll be wanting to read one type of book, and then the next day I'll be wanting to read a completely different type of book, so, But I do enjoy these, and this was a lot of fun. Oh, and it was really cool seeing more of Jarlaxle, and I think he does pop up more in the series as it goes on from here, so I'm really, really excited about that. He's a lot of fun, and he's also, I'm convinced he's like super pansexual, just, very queer, so, he's a lot of fun. He's very, sort of catty and bitchy and very like dry humor, and yeah, he's a lot of fun. I can't wait to see more of him, so yeah, enjoyed that. Then, talking about big boys, you might have seen me reading this on stream. This is The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. Stuart Turton was the author of The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I haven't read, but I've heard a lot of things about. A lot of good things about. And, yeah, this was a lot of fun. Actually, talking about Wolfgar, a big reason I read this was because there's a big boy in it. And, being a pervert, I enjoy reading about large, strong men, who can hold and comfort you at night. So this is sort of a Sherlock Holmes type, like a Holmes and Watson kind of thing. Takes place in 17th century? No, sorry, 17th century Netherlands, 1634 to be precise. And this follows Samuel Pepys and his bodyguard, Arent Hayes. Samuel Pepys is like, your Sherlock Holmes type. He's very prim and proper. He's always dressed nice. He's very handsome. And he's known for, his analytical mind and solving all these impossible crimes and things. He's very much in demand throughout the country. And Arent Hayes is like his Watson. He's this big, burly, huge. Once again, the book goes into frequent detail describing how very, very large he is. Massive bodyguard who they've been working together for 5 years, and he's like utterly devoted to him. And, and he helps, basically punch people when people need to be punched. And this follows the end of their latest adventure where Sammy, as he calls him, Sammy Pepys, gets arrested. And he goes along with him on this boat that's run by the Dutch East India Company to go to Amsterdam to have Samuel Pepys be sent to trial and to transfer this mysterious item that they've been hearing about called the Folly, but nobody knows what it is or what it does. But on this trip, they run into this mysterious leper who gives them this like demonic portent saying, they're all going to die and everything. And the more time they spend on the voyage, strange things start to happen. So Arent Hayes is forced to go kind of solve the mystery on his own without Sammy because, he's behind bars. And he meets this woman named Sarah, who's the wife of the Governor General who's on board. He's sort of like, the head honcho. And they end up working together to figure out what's going on and to solve these mysterious crimes. And this is pretty entertaining. I really enjoyed this. It's an interesting setting. I've never read a book that takes place in 1600s Amsterdam or sort of on a ship, but it's very Amsterdam, very Dutch kind of crew and setting and stuff. Never read anything like that, so that was interesting. A lot of the characters had names that were a little bit difficult to pronounce, like Sarah has this handmaiden named Krazia, spelled like this. I'll put it down here. And I wasn't sure how to pronounce that until Williams Library, very thankfully, showed me how. There's a few names like that, so it was very interesting. There's kind of a lot going on in this book. There's a lot of characters. There's a lot of themes and ideas. A lot of stuff kind of railing at the injustice of the Dutch East India Company and sort of the evil that men do, and the way that through this sort of seemingly demonic encounter on this ship, the way that men's hearts sort of easily turn to evil, when the opportunity arises. It's when the opportunity arises, and the atmosphere is really interesting. It takes place on a boat, but I wouldn't necessarily call it like a maritime novel. It's not really that type of thing. It's not really interested in sort of the daily life of running a ship, which is something that turns me off of a lot of maritime literature. It was just a really creepy sort of atmospheric mystery on a boat. The portents are really like mysterious, and the atmosphere itself is pretty well done. There's a lot of time spent lots of like storms and the ship rocking, and with all of this sort of seemingly demonic stuff happening, it gives it this very like sort of almost gothic kind of creepy air, which is a lot of fun. Again, like Arent is like Dream Man. he's massive, and the book goes to a lot of great pains to describe just how massive and to show him, kind of using his size to intimidate people. And there's a great like fight scene where he like beats the shit out of this guy, who's like trying to kill him and stuff like that. But he's also very like honorable and very pragmatic and a lot smarter than he gives himself credit for. In fact, Sammy talks about how, he's often trying to get him to sort of take the reins for a long time because he sees sort of that observational sort of detective ability inside of him. And it's really cool to sort of see him come into his own as a detective, through investigating these mysterious murders. And Sarah is a really strong, interesting character too. She's kind of, I don't want to say she's stereotypical, but it is very much like the kept woman who's sort of rebelling against her station. But I think that she's very pragmatic. She's very smart. She has a lot of skill in like science and like healing people and stuff. She's got this incredibly smart daughter named Leah, and she has this sort of budding sort of friendship that maybe blooms into something more with Arent that's like really interesting, and felt very organic instead of feeling kind of forced like a lot of romances do. It was all really interesting, and I enjoyed kind of just the overall atmosphere, like the description of the clothing and just kind of some of the cultural stuff. Like it was all interesting, but I wasn't like enthralled by it, and I don't know why. Like, again, I'm not saying it was bad. Like, I enjoyed the mystery and everything. I enjoyed the atmosphere and the characters. Like, everything was very, 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 very solid. But for some reason, I don't know why, I just sort of found myself, like, it was easier to like than it was to love. You know what I mean? So, I don't know why that is, because, like, I feel like all the elements were in place. I think part of it, one, is that I have some issues with the ending. Again, no spoilers. It's a mystery novel. I don't want to spoil the whole mystery. But, I did have some kind of issues with the way the mystery was resolved. It felt a little bit abrupt and kind of a little bit too pat for my liking. And while I enjoyed everything else about it, like nothing ever really just. I don't know. There wasn't that extra sort of spark or that extra oomph that really kind of solidified it with me, But again, it's a very atmospheric, fun, sort of I don't want to say breezy because it goes into a lot of really dark places, about sort of women's subjugation and sort of the rich, subjugating the poor and a lot of that kind of thing. But it's sort of a page turner. It's not complicated. It's easy to read. The characters are interesting. It's all interesting. I just wasn't necessarily enthralled by it, but I definitely liked it enough to want to read Evelyn Hardcastle. I've heard a lot about that one, so I do sort of lightly recommend it. I think if you like sort of murder mysteries and sort of kind of gothic, sort of horror adjacent vibes, I think you might enjoy it. And if you like big boys like I do, then you'll definitely enjoy it. I actually kind of wish there was a sequel to this because I think where the characters end up is more interesting than where they are in the beginning of the story, and I want to read their continuing adventures and ship several people, but we won't go into that. But yeah, like, I liked it. I didn't love it, but I do recommend it. So I think if you're into mysteries, you will enjoy it. And then finally, I had to get a Christmas read in there. And for some reason, I've been in the mood for a lot of murder mysteries lately. I read Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone recently, and I read that, Devil in the Dark Water. And then I just read this. This is The Christmas Jigsaw Murders by Alexandra Benedict. I just picked this up randomly in a charity shop back when I visited the UK last Christmas for like £1.50. Just not really expecting anything of it, just a Christmas murder mystery, something light and fluffy. And wow, this was a really big surprise. So this is about an 80-year-old puzzle setter named Edie O'Sullivan. She's your typical sort of like Scrooge type personality. She's very like brash and irascible and insulting everybody, very like I hate everyone type mentality. But she loves puzzles and anagrams and wordplay and things. And she works as a crossword setter for a local newspaper in Weymouth. And one day someone sends a letter through her letterbox with a bunch of puzzle pieces saying, solve this puzzle before someone dies. Three people will die before Christmas Eve, and you have to try and stop me. So that kind of forces her out of her sort of rut to try and solve this mystery alongside her son, Sean O'Sullivan, who's her nephew technically, but his parents died a long time ago and she adopted him. And he's become a DI at this point, so they kind of work together to solve this mystery. And yeah, this was a pleasant surprise. As I say, I kind of opened this just expecting, just light, fun, sort of Christmas murder mystery stuff. And it was that, but it did a lot of things that I didn't expect it to do. For one, this book is incredibly queer, which is a big surprise. I was not expecting it at all. But yeah, Edie herself, the 80-year-old woman, she's a lesbian, and it goes into a lot of detail about her ex-girlfriend, Skye, and kind of how that relationship fell apart and how her own sort of like hang-ups and stuff, her way of kind of pushing people away led her to kind of ruin this very, precious relationship that she had, and how it almost ruined her relationship with Sean and everything. And it goes a lot into that sort of found family thing about how, Sean isn't her son by blood, but she's raised him for so long that she thinks of him as her son, and Sean is gay too, which I was really surprised by. So you've got a lesbian and a gay man as the main characters in this book, and that was a wonderful, wonderful, pleasant surprise. And Edie's a lot of fun, like she's your very, like as I say, she's very like your typical like irascible, like bitchy old woman in a lot of ways, but she's very cutting, very witty, very dry, it's that very typical sort of dry, blunt British humor that I always really enjoy, so if you enjoy kind of zingers and stuff like that, there's a ton of that in this book. Just the banter is really fun. But she's also very different in some ways in that, she's this old woman, but she, kind of like dresses weird, and like, a skull scarves and things like that. She's got like crazy red hair. There's a bit in the book where Sean's reflecting on her sort of history, and it talks about how, she's always kind of been a woman out of time, it talks about how she was like a punk in her 50s, and she was like she was like a punk in her 40s, and she was like a raver in her 50s, so she's not your typical stereotypical old lady, in a lot of ways, and she's just a lot of fun to read. I really, really liked her. And Sean, in comparison, is a little bit more bland, but he's kind of your typical, he's very sunshiny, and he's very much about, sort of seeing the good in people as a contrast to Edie. And he has a husband named Liam that he's trying to adopt this little girl together with, and that whole plot line is like really sweet and endearing and, very very something you would expect out of a book like this, very like feel good Christmassy stuff. That was a lot of fun, and it was also just very cool to see just a queer character just kind of exist and be, and not have it be commented on or anything like that. I enjoyed that. Generally, I just think this book's just a lot of fun, and it goes into a lot of places that I wouldn't expect it to emotionally. I mean, as you can tell with Edie being a Christmas skeptic, this is kind of going for like a Christmas Carol kind of thing, where it's about her sort of learning to sort of accept love into her heart and to learn to love Christmas because all this horrible stuff happened to her on Christmas. So she's very much like bah humbug, and through her sort of adventures in this story, she kind of learns to let love in and to stop pushing people away, and to stop sort of using her sort of angry, cranky, old cantankerous sort of, cutting wit as sort of a shield, and that character arc I thought was really beautifully done, surprising. I mean, the thing that's right, this is a very emotional book. Like, I was really, like, into the characters, like, emotionally speaking. Like, I wanted to see them succeed, and they were entertaining and interesting, and in particular, Edie's got this like great friend, this like 95-year-old woman who lives next door to her, or like, not far away from her flat, named Riga. And she's like, she's very like regal, kind of, they describe her as looking like a dowager vampiress, and, just kind of swirling her drinks and, and like, oh, yes, and like making all of these cutting remarks. I pictured Joanna Lumley as a grandmama in the recent season of Wednesday, just very kind of old money, just very like, oh yes, you're still here, and she's a lot of fun. I loved her, and she gets a lot of screen time too, which is really, really entertaining. And the mystery itself is pretty fun too. I'm not one of those people who goes into mysteries like all about, like, oh, I have to solve the puzzle and everything has to make sense. I care more about characters and style and atmosphere than I do the actual sort of puzzle. But there's a lot of like sort of puzzle elements. The author herself really has a thing for anagrams, to the point that there's the book opens up with these games that are full of like anagrams of Charles Dickens stories. She's got anagrams of like Fleetwood Mac novels, because this was published after Christy McVie died. And at the top of each chapter here is a puzzle piece that, when put together, makes an anagram for, it makes an anagram for a well-known Christmas song and its singer. I haven't solved that anagram, but apparently whoever did got a little treat. I don't know what. I haven't looked into it, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff. So because Edie is a puzzle setter, there's a lot of stuff about sort of how Jigsaw puzzles are solved, and sort of how anagrams work, and sort of going into kind of her analytical mind and how she sees things that way. It was all really, really fun and entertaining, and they even, as I say, they even delve into some sort of darker themes about the way people can get left behind and forgotten, and sort of how so many, how hurt people and stuff like that, and surprisingly, it turns out to be a very sort of heartwarming story about, how we need more of a capacity to love. We should love people more, and we should take people seriously and treat them with, love and respect. And, it's very like Christmassy stuff, surprisingly. So there is like a surprising amount of like little sort of Christmas fuzzy wuzziness that contrasts very nicely with all the horrible murders being committed, And they even go a little bit into the psychology of the murderer. There's a few chapters written from the murderer's perspective, where it talks about how, they don't want to be doing this, they feel horrible having to kill people, but, it's something they must do, which is also very interesting, kind of in contrast to your usual murder mystery villain, who just kills wantonly and enjoys it, So yeah, this was a pleasant little surprise. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, I wasn't expecting a whole lot from it other than, just to be entertained, and I was entertained and then some, I really, really liked this. It was a very pleasant surprise. So I definitely want to search out more of Alexandra Benedict's stuff. I think she writes other books under the name A.K. Benedict, I believe. So I'll definitely be checking some of those out. A lot of sort of mysteries and historical thrillers and that kind of thing, it looks like. So yeah, and I think she might be queer herself. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into it. But yeah, like, just for a book like this to be this like wonderfully involving, emotionally moving mystery with these flagrantly queer characters, like it was, and this was like a bestseller. I found this, I actually was going to buy this originally because I saw it in Tesco, or no, Morrison's, sorry, and I was gonna buy it there, and then it got removed after Christmas, and I never got a chance to. And then by chance, I found it like 2 days before we were gonna head back at a charity shop for £1.50. So I got very lucky there, and I'm really glad. I mean, £1.50, well spent. So yeah, if you love Christmassy stuff, if you love murder mysteries, I would highly, highly recommend this. It's a lot of fun. Definitely gonna check out more of her stuff. So yeah, those are the 3 books that I've read so far. I'm probably not going to finish another book this year unless I get through some of these really, really fast. I am reading some shorter ones, so we'll see. I was thinking about doing like a top 5 or a top 10, but to be honest, I was like going through some of my earlier reads, and it was like, man, there's nothing that I'm really like super jazzed about that I haven't already talked about that you can just go and watch my videos, Like, to be honest, it's been kind of like a weak reading year for me, unfortunately. This is the lowest amount of books I've read since I got back into reading, so a little disappointed about that, honestly, but I'm keeping on. Got plenty of books to read, gonna keep going, and there have been a lot of pleasant surprises this year, like that one, so I think I'm all right, but I hope everyone else has had a good year. I hope everyone else is having a good holidays. I hope you have a good New Year's, and let's hope 2026 has some silver linings, let's hope there's brighter days ahead, because I know things are very difficult right now. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and until then, I'll see you next time. Bye.